Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. It's a very special episode today where you're going to hear Mark Bouris discuss what the Reserve Bank should really be thinking about when it makes decisions on interest rates. You're going to hear Mark Bouris explain how he keeps his wealth, and it's got nothing to do with money or what you think about. And he's also going to explain the real reason you should build wealth. Now, Mark was the guest speaker at our recent wealth retreat. You're going to get a portion of his discussion in this podcast today. There was lots of questions and answers and other interaction with him later, but there's a good long discussion that you're going to hear. Now, if you're not familiar with who Mark Bouris is, he is the executive chairman of Yellow Brick Road, but he established a successful career from building disruptive businesses to challenge the market and provide smarter solutions for customers, particularly in the area of finance. But he's well recognised as a leading thinker, and in 2015 he was appointed a member of the Order of Australia. So you're going to enjoy Mark Bouris telling us a little bit about money, a little bit about health, a little bit about wealth. Let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
As I explained in the introduction, you're about to hear Mark Bouris' keynote speech at Wealth Retreat. We missed the first couple of seconds, so he's starting off to explain about the data sets that the Reserve Bank should be looking at when making interest rate decisions. Let's hear what he's got to say.
So there's really 4 data sets. And I want to dedicate the first part of my 45 minutes, which is the speaking part, then there's Q&A at the end of that. I want to dedicate the first part of that to talking about this. So the first data set clearly is inflation, and that's a really important one. But what we need to understand this. Like, they talk about inflation, the newspaper talks about inflation, television talks about inflation, there's an inflation number comes out a couple of days ago and everyone's jumping up and down about it. But what does this all mean? How do we strip away all the crap? And where do I find out the real fundamentals about this and what is driving their decision making? So when it comes to CPI, the Reserve Bank doesn't print anything. It's printed by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the Australian Bureau of Statistics prints their numbers now for inflation monthly and also quarterly. So when do they print these numbers? Because, by the way, the Reserve Bank does not get access to these numbers any sooner than anyone in this room does. The ABS prints a number on a certain date, and everyone knows the dates. The Reserve Bank gets access that day. You can get access that day. The money markets get access that day. The banks get access this day. It's the same day, and it's on abs.com.au or .gov or whatever it is, and it's all available, and it's very simple, and it's well written out. It's actually very easy language. No one has an excuse not to know what the print that the ABS puts out on any one occasion. There's no excuse. It's not complex. It's well summarised. It's easy to find. It's I'm not going to necessarily say it's mathematically or statistically accurate, but it is what it is. It is the number because that's the methodology they use. But nonetheless, and that's the number the Reserve Bank looks at. So recently, the ABS put out annualised our inflation number on a yearly basis to the end of March. Generally speaking, the ABS puts out the last quarter's number and then an annualised number for inflation the following month at the end of the quarter, around 26, 27 days. So for the March quarter, it's going to come out at the end of April, well, close enough to. And it happens every quarter like that. So the June numbers are going to come out sometime towards the end of July, and the September numbers come out at the end of October, and the December numbers come out at the end of January. There's a rhythm. It's pretty simple. And you don't have to have any special knowledge about this. You just need to know we're going to start looking at this stuff around about now, and it'll tell you when they're going to release the numbers. And when they release the recent numbers, everyone got a big shock because the Australian Bureau of Statistics number for inflation came out higher than everybody expected. albeit lower than it was the same time last year. What do I need to understand about these ABS numbers for inflation? Well, the first thing is it's backward looking. That's really important. What's important about that? Well, if for the last quarter, for example, for the March quarter, say January, February, March, if inflation for that period was 0.3%, just for the quarter, when you annualise it, because they want to know what the annual number is, the Reserve Bank wants to know the annual numbers, they don't go 0.3 multiplied by 4 and say it's 1.2. They don't do that. They don't take the March quarter and say the December quarter, to take 2 quarters backwards and then maybe extrapolate from that 2 quarters forward. They take 4 quarters from the end of March. So they take March through to March the previous year. So if I then said to you, well, if it's 0.2 for the March quarter, quarterly inflation, and if I just said to anyone in this room, what do you think the December number was for the quarter? What do you think the September quarter was? And what do you think the June quarter was in 2023? Well, you know it's going to be higher because the high interest rates have been around longer than the last quarter we just had, therefore have a bit greater effect. But in the previous quarters hadn't had the same effect because they hadn't been around long enough. And also we had some rate rises last year as well. So and they take, there's a bit of a lead period. It takes about 6 months to have an effect. So therefore, the March quarter 2023 numbers for just that one quarter is much higher than 0.3 or 0.2, much higher. They take a whole year and they take every quarter in the previous period, add them all up, and they say that's the yearly inflation. It's a matter of record. But it doesn't really mean that's inflation. That's not current inflation. That does not represent price rises from week to week or services rises from week to week. It looks at the total of price rises, which is why I said earlier on that probably the way we measure inflation today is inaccurate. Or it's not accurate. It's not inaccurate, but it's not necessarily accurate. But if you have this knowledge, you can make a proper decision about where you think things are going. If you just take the last quarter and if you just go forward, say nothing changes, we're just going to have the same inflation for the last quarter as we're going to have for the next 3 quarters. Our CPI number's around 2.5%, which is what the Reserve Bank said. They want to be between 2 and 3%. So therefore, if you extrapolate that, it tells you that inflation is definitely heading in the right direction, that at some stage we're going to have reduced interest rates because inflation is going to get into the territory where the Reserve Bank stated they wanted to have it. And as a result of reduced interest rates, something is really important. Every 50 basis points the Reserve Bank reduces interest rates by, therefore lenders reduce their rates by, for every 50 basis points that interest rates get reduced and or increased, borrowers can borrow 5% more, or if they're increasing, 5% less. So if a borrower, you need to know the behaviour of a borrower, this is knowledge, the behaviour of a borrower, if a borrower can borrow 5% more, they just spend 5% more. That's how it works. So if I can borrow $1 million, but next month I can borrow $1,050,000, and I'm a buyer, I'll spend $1,050,000 because every buyer can borrow now $1,050,000. Not just me, everybody. The whole data set, which means we're all competing with each other and the highest price wins, as you know, and as a result of that, the property price will go up by $50,000. So you're saying to yourself, okay, well, hang on a minute, Mark, how many 50 basis point reductions do you think are going to happen in the Reserve Bank cycle when they start reducing rates? Well, the question is when? Right now, it's not this year. It won't be this year, or might be at the end of the year, but it's not this year, probably not this year. So, but when they do, it'll be next year. And how many rate reductions can I see or you see? I can definitely see two rate reductions. But this is where another piece of knowledge becomes really important. There's a concept called net zero rates, net zero interest rates. This is a Reserve Bank concept that no one talks about. The Reserve Bank likes to see the official rate at 0 or close to 0 relative to inflation. So if inflation is 3% and the official rate of interest is 3.2%, you take 3.2% away from 3%, 3% I should say away from 3.2%, you've got 0.2%, that's nearly close to 0. That's where the Reserve Bank likes to be, in a normal period, in a sustainable normal period. So you've got to ask yourself, well, if the RBA wants interest rates to be, inflation to be between 2 and 3%, and if I think to myself, realistically, where do I think inflation will really land where the Reserve Bank is happy? It's probably around 2.9 or 3%. Right now, our official rate is 4.35. So if we're going to go, if the Reserve Bank wants to hit net zero, you would expect the Reserve Bank to reduce interest rates from 4.35 down to something between 3 and 3.5. So what we're looking at there is 0.85% of a reduction, official rate, down to maybe 1% of reduction. Therefore, we're looking at somewhere between borrowers being able to get 5% more to 10% more, which means property markets should go up over and above what they're currently doing as a result of lack of supply. They should naturally increase by 5 to 10%. The question is, you don't know, is when will these rate reductions start to occur? Now, and by the way, as I said earlier, the Reserve Bank doesn't know. They're looking for the data, and the first set of data is they're looking for inflation. But right now, you don't have inflation in the right territory. It's heading in the right direction. Bear in mind that they're looking at historical inflation, back to 12 months. Definitely right now, it's heading in the right direction in the last quarter. I can't see people going out and overspending all of a sudden. But you might say to yourself, but when I read the ABS statistics, what are the things that are affecting inflation? Well, right now, the things that are affecting inflation is government expenditure. Government is overspending. Now, like that's typical Labor systems. We've got it in state and federal. It's a problem. But they are actually fueling inflation. That's the first thing. Second thing that fuels inflation is immigration. And we know we've got record immigration because every time someone comes in the country, they've got to buy something. They've got to buy a whole lot of stuff. The third thing that's fueling inflation is services. The biggest impact, so inflation is a basket of goods and services the Australian Bureau of Statistics determines. In the services basket, in the goods services, we're going down. Like prices are going down. In some areas, we have deflation. But services are going the other way. The big ones in relation to services that are creating a problem. So services is the part of inflation that is being really stubborn. The first big one is rent. Now, that's a government issue because government have not released enough land, councils don't approve enough DAs, blah, 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 blah. And we're letting too many people in relative to the amount of properties we've got to house them. So that's a government policy issue. Will that get solved? Well, maybe you need an election to get that one solved. That's the first thing. Services, that part of services which relates to rent is a massive distorter of our current inflation numbers. So it's making it more stubborn, which means it's going to take longer to get these interest rate reductions that I'm talking about. Rent. Second one is childcare. Problem is government's given more money to parents, but the problem is childcare centres have just put the prices up, which is creating inflation. The third one is secondary and tertiary education. Government and private schools. People are leaving private schools in record numbers. Leaving government schools in record numbers. They're going to private schools. Private schools are saying they're opening up all over the joint, and private schools are just putting the fees up wherever they want in secondary. And then in tertiary, that's government. Government just reset in February in accordance with their reset provisions. They reset all their pricing for tertiary. Mind you, it all gets put on the never on the HEC scheme, but it doesn't matter. All prices for tertiary went up. That's a bit of a distortion for the current number, but that's government again. And the last one, the big one, is insurance. Insurance has had a 17% increase in prices. Again, it's not something we can control. And the third one, of course, is petrol, fuel, and electricity. Not gas, but electricity. All related to government policy. Do we think that something is going to change there? Probably not until we get a change of government. If at all, even if we do get a change of government. So point being here is this. When it comes to the inflation number, and when this inflation number is going to give us some relief such that the Reserve Bank when will they start putting rates down at a rate that I'm just talking about to get it to net zero? We have no control over these numbers, and it's the reason why the money market's now reacting badly to this and are actually predicting rate reductions sometime in 2025. What we don't want to have is a massive problem as a result of this. In other words, you all would have heard there's currently record bankruptcy, people filing for bankruptcies and administration at the moment, more so than in the small business world, more so than we've ever seen in our past. What we don't want happen here, and it could happen by the way, is that the borrowing market, or the market of people who borrow money for business or for mortgages, etc., actually suffers so badly in order to get inflation into where we want it, that we end up having some form of recession in the economy. I honestly don't believe the governments could care less. This current government could care less. I don't think they care. They're not that interested. They'll just blame the previous government, or they'll blame the Reserve Bank, they'll blame someone else, they'll blame the banks, they'll blame somebody else. It won't be them. So the first marker of the 4 markers that you need to look at is inflation, in terms of your knowledge about building a strategy around being resilient against what the economy is delivering you. The second one, in terms of what the Reserve Bank's looking at, is GDP. Now, GDP is an unusual number. We calculate in Australia in an unusual, well, not an unusual way, but we calculate it again. It's a bit of a fiction, but we calculate it based on what they call the expenditure methodology. It's nothing wrong with the methodology, but it's inaccurate in that they don't actually go and work out gross domestic product by looking at what everybody spends. It's not possible. They take samples, they're field samples, they're not even AI-based samples, they're not digitally produced samples. They are going out and saying to people, how much did you spend? And they go into a coffee shop and they say, what's your take for coffee this month? And they have these hundreds and hundreds of field officers go to do this every month. Anyway, the expenditure methodology is household expenditure, which accounts for about 65% of the total number. It's government expenditure, both state, federal and council. It's also local, I should say. It's also business investment plus business investment, which includes mining and non-mining, and then it's the difference between exports and imports. They add that all up and it gives you a GDP number. Again, the source of the data comes from field expeditions, and they're out there every day. Mind you, I've never met one. I don't know anyone in this room has ever met one. If you have, please put your hand up, because these people are mysterious to me. They don't actually canvass that many people. They do it on a statistical methodology that gives them a 95% confidence level that the outcome, the mathematical outcome is correct, the statistical outcome is correct, which is easy to do, but it's a fiction proved by a mathematical formula. So, and as I said, it's not quant-based. It's not AI delivered. It's actual physical, and it hasn't changed for 50 years or 60 years, however long they've been taking these statistics. But GDP, nonetheless, is a measure of growth. It's a measure of how well we are going. It's actually a measure of our standard of living. One thing you need to know is one thing that drives GDP is population growth. Big time. And the only group that gets actually really measured by GDP is governments. You couldn't give a crap about GDP. The Reserve Bank wants to know. The government wants to say GDP is growing. They don't want to say we're not growing, because that's a recession. Negative GDP is a recession. So governments want to say, we're measured by this methodology, which says we, the government, are overseeing a country that's growing. If the country's not actually growing, and I'm the government, what I do is I just open the doors and let everybody in. And 600,000 people in the calendar year last year will make my GDP number grow in absolute terms. But in terms of growth per capita, we're negative. So if you take population before growth, then you take population after growth and you apply it against the GDP number, you'll see that population before growth, we grew in GDP, not much, 0.2% for the quarter. So very, very low. But if you then apply the per capita number against it, we're negative. So we're basically in a negative, we're in a recession when you look at GDP relative to population. But the Reserve Bank looks at this number, but they don't look at the per capita number. They look at the top line. So they would still be saying, we're growing, it's okay, we're growing. So, we don't need to reduce interest rates. We don't need to worry about reducing interest rate yet. So that's the second one to look at, GDP. The third one to look at, and this is a really important one. Now, this is only new. Last year we had a review of the Reserve Bank, led by Jim Chalmers, and it came up with a whole lot of findings. We've got 2 Reserve Bank boards now. The second one hasn't actually been appointed yet. They got rid of the old Reserve Bank governor and appointed a new Reserve Bank governor. but also a new part of their mandate, a more expressed and emphasised part of the mandate, is that the new Reserve Bank, or the new emphasised part of the Reserve Bank's mandate, is that they must consider full employment. Now, under previous Reserve Bank governors, we never really had to think about that. It was just about inflation and GDP. Now, full employment, no one even knows what full employment is. So what they do is in reverse, they say, okay, what's unemployment? Participation rates and all those other things as well. Underemployed, participation rates, but also unemployment. So you can extrapolate whether we got full employment by looking at the unemployment number. So you're going to say, okay, great, Mike. So where's that number come from? Again, it comes from the ABS, comes out every quarter, and they print a monthly one as well. But so what? I see unemployment's at 3.8%. What does that mean? 3.9%, it was at 4.1 a little while ago, then it dropped down to 3.8, then it went back up to 3.1. What does all this stuff mean? Again, in terms of building your resilience around knowledge, the Reserve Bank has made it pretty clear what they want the unemployment number to be. And most people wouldn't even know what it is because you don't read their publications, but they put publications out. And there's been a publication, it was printed 2 months before the Reserve Bank governor was appointed. She led this publication. This publication talked about a thing called NAIRU. It stands for the Non-Accelerating Inflation Rate of Unemployment. So that basically what that means is, what is the Reserve Bank looking for? We know they want 2 to 3% for inflation. We know that one. We know the GDP, they'd like it to be up around 3%. They definitely don't want it negative. What is the unemployment number they're now being mandated to look at? Well, it is this thing called NAIRU. So they've modelled, and we all know what modelling does because we all went through the COVID period. Everyone was going to die and no one did. Or not many people did, and some people unfortunately died, but more people died from the flu than died from COVID. But this is all based on modelling. And as anyone in this room knows, if you've done any form of modelling is flawed by definition because you can never put in terms of inputs, put in every single input because you don't know what they are. If I was trying to work out what the economy was going to do in 2020 and I was trying to do this exercise in 2019 and I didn't know there was a pandemic coming and I left that out of my modelling, I would have got it completely wrong. So by definition. So NAIRU is a model. But on this model, I've seen the modelling. It's been published. The modelling says the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, that is, what is the rate of unemployment we, the Reserve Bank, want to see in this country that we will be satisfied that inflation is not accelerating. In other words, we've got it under control. And it's 4.5%. So the Reserve Bank's saying, we're not going to do anything until we see unemployment around 4.5%. Well, right now it's stubbornly sitting around 3.8, 3.9. It jumped to 4.1, but it's come back a bit. Now, they're not even focusing on participation rate, percentage of people employed in the population relative to the population, which is going backwards because we've got more people here, or underemployment. They're not even looking at that. They're looking at this one number. What is the unemployment number? And it's important for you to know this because the Reserve Bank's going to sit around, unless they review this model, which they haven't done since August last year, but if they may be under review, and you can see, you can always go into the rba.com.au or .gov, whatever it is, and you can find out what it is anyway, but it is 4.5%. They're saying, we, the Reserve Bank, believe that only at 4.5% unemployment number in Australia will we have the ability to control inflation. Therefore, we will not take our foot off the pedal until we get to that number. Now, that's a worry. Because if unemployment stays in the low 4s or even the high 3s, you're not going to get relief. So again, I'm going back to, when will these rate reductions occur? Well, that's your other marker. That's your third marker. So you got the first two, that's your third marker. And the final one, which is really important, is productivity. Now, this is not something anyone talks about, but it's a really big deal in Australia. And I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to productivity, the Reserve Bank's view on this, and they talk about it every time they put out their every 6-week report, they talk about wage price pressures on inflation. Now, there is a lot of wage price pressure at the moment, and there has been for a while now, and they don't like to see wage increases, or the index, increase above 4, and it has been for a while. But they're trying to predict for the future. So they're saying, well, what's really the problem with wages going up? Well, it goes like this. If I'm running a coffee shop and I sell 1,000 cups of coffee a day, and I've got three staff members who are charging, they cost me $1,000 a day, but all of a sudden there's a wage price pressure. They're now costing me $1,300 a day. My profit is a lot less, my margin is a lot less, and because I'm the only coffee shop in the area, I now can put my price of coffee up to recover my margin based on my cost. So wage price pressure in itself is not really a big problem if you've got more productivity associated with it. But because on the example I just gave you, if I'm now paying $1,300 a day for my staff to produce 1,000 cups of coffee a day, if that $1,300, that extra $300 a day that I'm paying for my staff, if for some reason my staff can now produce 1,300 cups of coffee, in other words, increase their productivity, then I don't need to put my price up because I'm making the same amount of money because I'm selling more coffee. So wage has gone up, but productivity has gone up. So productivity is the fourth thing that RBA looks at. And productivity in Australia is going backwards. And to some extent, it's a bit of a throwback from COVID. Like productivity in office environments has gone backwards. Productivity, generally speaking, as opposed to America, in Australia, is one of the worst of the developed nations in terms of growth. And we have productivity commissions and all sorts of things, but against the productivity commission, or against the need for productivity, you've got trade unions who are pushing against productivity. You know, we want more time off, we want sick leave, we want bereavement leave, we want this leave, we want that leave, et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on and on. So there's a negative environment relative to productivity in this country. The Reserve Bank's onto it. They're watching it every month. They talk about it every 6 weeks. Productivity is a big issue for them because they take the view, if we're going to have wage price pressures or wage index changes across the country, unless we got productivity changes across the country, the RBA takes the view that we are in the danger zone for vendors to increase their prices at any time, which means that the non-accelerating inflation is not under control. It means that at any time, vendors could increase their prices, which means the new lower inflation number is not sustainable. And it's always in the back of their head. Now, you don't get journalists talking about this sort of stuff, commentators, no one ever talks about this sort of stuff. But these are the things that the RBA is looking at. So what I wanted to just to quickly go through with you, and I've got another section I want to talk about, but I want to go through today with, they're the four things, if you want to be resilient, and you want to have, therefore, and you take the view like I do, that knowledge builds resilience. And therefore, what knowledge do I need to have? One, where do I find it? You don't find it in the AFR. You don't find it in the Sydney Morning Herald. You won't find it on Channel 9 News or Channel 7 or Channel 10 or the ABC. You're not going to find it. They're all commentators. And with the greatest respect, a lot of them haven't been around very long. They're just young commentators that are just trying to get headlines, and they'll read something in the one paper and they'll reconstitute and write it up in their thing. And they don't even read the ABS statistics. They don't even look at this stuff. The only place you get this information is from what the RBA says every 6 weeks, and it's 1 page, 1.5 pages. Then every second period of 6 weeks, they put out a full report. Then every 6 months of every period, they put out an even more full report. And it's really easy to read. It's not dense. It's very easy to read. And they hit the main points that I've just gone through every time. And the question then becomes, well, where do they get that from? Well, they draw their conclusions from data that is analysed, the analytics of which are done by the ABS. So all you need to know is abs.gov.org and rba.gov.org, and you just go to media releases, and you'll see the stuff yourself for the first hand, based on what I've just told you now. They're the only 4 things you need to worry about. Don't forget about anything else. They're the 4 things. Don't go read what somebody else has interpreted this as. Read what the ABS has interpreted it as. Read what the RBA has interpreted it as. They're the only important ones. They're the ones that make decisions. It doesn't matter if the methodology is flawed or not. They're making decisions on flawed methodologies, but they're still making the decisions. You need to know what the decision's likely to be. So, mindset is about strategy. Strategy is about knowledge, constant, up-to-date, relevant knowledge about what others are going to do that's going to affect you. That's how I get through my businesses all the time, on every occasion. I don't rely on other people, in my case. I look this stuff up at source. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about is, by the way, it's not possible to be resilient intellectually in your business with this knowledge that I'm talking about, whatever your business might be, unless you have the ability to execute. So execution risk is one of the biggest risks I see all the time. And execution risk is obviously about the talent you have around you, the people who work with you and for you and your colleagues and all that sort of stuff. I want to put that aside. I'm not here to talk about that today. But I'm here to talk about execution risk relative to yourself. So this requires, again, a certain mindset around your personal ability. And let's say you're someone who wants to wants to drink booze every night of the week, which means you don't sleep properly, you don't wake up properly, you're not able then to build habits, healthy habits that allow you to execute. So you actually become part of the execution risk. And for me, it's really important. I've learned over many, many years how important my execution risk is relative to my success or the business's success. So I just want to talk to you quickly about two things. People who are writing bestsellers now. You get podcast guys like Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia and various other. Simon Hill up here, or he's just in northern New South Wales. He's a very good Australian version of Peter Attia, Simon Hill, talking about lifespan, health span. And anybody in here who's got a wife and you're over 50, you've probably got the Peter Attia's book given to you at last Christmas to make sure you live longer and better, so that the whole family will benefit from your elongated stay on this planet. And if you haven't got it, you probably will get it from your grandsons or your sons, and if you haven't got it, you should bloody get it anyway. But they talk about lifespan and health span. I just want to talk about strategies that I use. So again, I don't rely on their books, but I have been inspired and motivated by their enthusiasm. I do listen to their stuff. So I listen to their podcasts, but selectively. But I have a strategy. I've had a strategy for 20 years on this stuff. Unknowingly, it was a strategy I sort of developed because I just felt better when I did it. And the strategy is around to eliminate the execution risk of having good knowledge around the industry you're involved in, to eliminate or reduce, I should say, the execution risk, because everything's about risk, and the probability of event occurring. So the first question becomes, what is the event occurring that you are worried about the probability for, Mark? Well, mine is either being incapacitated or die. Pretty simple. So therefore, the probability of those events occurring, what are the things that affect, like I just went through 4 things then for the RBA, what are maybe 4 things that I can look at that relate to those probabilities? Now, Peter Attia has put it quite eloquently. He calls it the 4 horsemen. That's very clever marketing, but it's brain disease, heart disease, cancer, or metabolic disease. For example, diabetes or something like that, or getting bad joints as a result of bad lifestyle, which can result in all sorts of statistical outcomes. As I said, quite eloquently put, the 4 horsemen. At the end of the day, everyone in this room will die from one of those things. I don't care if you're 110 or you're 58 or 48, you'll die from one of those things. Either your heart's going to give up, cancer's going to get you, you're going to die of a brain disease, or a metabolic disease like diabetes is going to cause you to have a heart attack or something along those lines. So that's where the probabilities lie. So what's my strategy around this stuff? Well, the first thing is I go and examine, of those 4 things, which one of those do I have most risk for in a statistical sense. So I go and look at my family, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunties, who's died from what. And I actually write this shit down. I've mapped it out. In my family, it's a bit difficult, a bit more onerous because I've got 7, my dad's got 6 brothers, 7 boys. My mum's got 2 sisters, so it's a big family. and now I've got lots of uncles and aunties, and grandparents. But I mapped it out, and I do know what everybody passed away from. The next thing I do is, okay, now I know, what am I going to do about it? What second lot of knowledge can I get in terms of my strategy? In my case, my mother died of motor neuron disease, a brain disease, and she died at 86. So I'm lucky enough, I was able to pay for a genome test for dementia, Parkinson's and MND to find the markers that these organisations know that are currently found in all those people that die from one of those diseases. So there are brain markers in your blood that are always present in these people. Now, it doesn't mean that if you don't have any of those markers, you won't get it, but it definitely means if you do have one of those markers, you have a chance of getting it. And knowledge is power. So I went through that process. Once I build my familial statistical risk or probability, then I try to eliminate those probabilities by getting tests. No one's died in my family from heart attacks. Cancer is another big killer in my family. So what are the big cancers in my family? So I went and checked out what they were. So I go and find specialists who are involved in these areas. Now, this is a really important thing. And I have access to those individuals. And how do I get it? I pay. And I work out where is the sweet spot that allows me to get close to that particular urologist or gastroenterologist or whatever the case may be. Where's the sweet spot for me? What donations do I need to make? Where do I need to turn up? And all this, by the way, is premised on one thing. You can afford it. Wealth is so closely aligned to good health span and longevity, it is not funny. And you can't do what I do unless you've made a lot of money. And you won't make a lot of money unless you do what I just said before. You have a lot of knowledge about the industry you're in and have a strategy around that. Because at the end of the day, it's not about being good at what you do. It's about living the longest and healthiest life as you possibly can. It's not about sitting here, by the way. Sitting here is a means to maybe listen to someone like me, carry on, about helping you live a better life and your family. So I'm just sharing you with my strategy. So once I worked out my probability and my risk and how do I diminish the risk through having people who I can talk to and what's the sweet spot, how do I get to them? And that's not an easy thing to do. That's about networks. You've all got networks, but have you got medical networks? Have you got health networks? What are you doing in that regard? Or are you just spending all your money buying more property and building your asset base? Well, an asset base for any one of you, I can tell you now, is a good network in the health environment. Are you a member if you live in Sydney, if you live near the St Vincent's, are you a member of the Curran Foundation? Do you give the Curran Foundation $10,000 a year? Which automatically gets you to see any specialist you need to see immediately and anyone in your family. Did you know that? Anyone here a Curran Foundation member? I bet you every one of them could afford it. And they'll take your money and they give your person a call if something goes wrong and you and your family, and they get straight into St Vincent's private and you get to see whoever you need to see. They organise it for you. You need to see a cardiologist. When my mother started having a few problems with her brain 5 years ago, I rang my friend there. She put me straight on to a neurologist. My mum was seeing her the next day. Ordinarily, you want to go see a neurologist, it's Vincent, you might have to wait 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. My mother was dead in 6 months from the first symptom. You need to have money to get into these people. But you need to know how to spend the bloody money. You need to know how to deploy this. And first you need to know which person you need to see. In order to know which person you need to see, you've got to have a strategy about your statistical probability of something occurring. And you need to build this strategy out. So that's how you diminish your risk. But there's another way, another thing that you personally can influence. And it's pretty simple for me. Everyone's got all these complicated stuff going on, but it's pretty simple. There's 3 strategies, or strategies around 3 areas. One, if I can start first thing in the morning, you can do it you can start in any order you like, but it's exercise regime, physical exercise regime. Now, when I say a strategy, I mean a strategy. I don't mean just going for a walk or going to the gym, building muscles up or whatever it is, or playing tennis. I'm saying have a strategy around what your exercise needs to give you in terms of outcomes, and how often, therefore that will determine how often you need to do it, etc. So in my case, I am concerned about mental disease, okay, like a brain disorder, because it's happened on my dad's side and on my mum's side. So I went and consulted a neurologist. I said, if someone had dementia, what would be the ordinary thing you do? What would you normally do? He said, we can't cure it. He said, but what we would say in early stages is do high-intensity exercise. High-intensity exercise is good for dementia. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, you all know what high-intensity exercise means. You've got to get your heart rate to a certain level. You've got to be able to sweat. That's not going for a walk. Sure, you can go for a walk, but you need to do this a couple of times a week. But I go a little bit further than that. I say, well, I am a grandfather. I've got 3 grandsons. What do I want to be able to do when I'm 70, which is only 2 years away, or 80? What functions do I want to be able to perform? Now, I'm not a builder. I'm not a plumber. I don't do anything that I don't have a physical requirement in my life. But I do want to be able to pick my grandkids up. I do want to be able to, if one of them is at the end there, and where Mark is standing at the cross the road, and there's traffic there, and is waving and pop, and he or she's only 2 or 3 and is about to run across it, I want to be able to sprint across that road at speed and stop that from happening. That's a function I want to be able to do. Well, have any of you ever actually gone up to a park and seen, like, when you're not when you're warmed up, when you're not warmed up, can you sprint 20 metres? Absolutely, go flat out 20 metres. I don't mean in terms of will you be puffed. I don't mean that. Can you actually just take off? No, most people can't over 50, because you're going to say bad hip, bad knee, but whatever, bad back, or just cold. I just couldn't get my rhythm going. When we were 20, we could. When we were 25, we could just do anything. You get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go for a run, sprint. You know, like now, I'm 68, getting out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and take what blokes have to do. I can hardly get out of bed. I'm walking like this, clobbering down the hallway to find the bathroom. So, that was a bit of a wake-up call for me. So I had to build a strategy in terms of my exercise about what are the functions, Mark, you want to be able to do as a 70, 80 and perhaps 90. What are they? Has anyone in this room read the book 4,000 Weeks? Thank you. Not enough of you. That's a wake-up call. Read that book. That's Peter T's favourite book. You got 4,000 weeks from the day you're born to the day you die. Statistically, I'm talking about. Hopefully all of you get many more. But get that book. I've got 676 weeks left. Not very many. I'm trying to work out how do I make that another 1,000. How can I get to 100? How can I make that 1,676 weeks? Because 676 weeks doesn't sound very good to me. I don't care how much money I got, how many assets. I don't like the sound of 676 weeks. And every week goes by, it's coming down. And every week, and as time goes on, the marginal utility of the last 200 weeks will be nowhere near as good as the utility of the first 476 weeks. So my strategy is around this stuff. My exercise strategy is around this, all this. It's not about just going to the gym and doing some weights or what. I actually build a strategy for every day of the week to do something. And it doesn't mean I'm training mental every day. Some days, every other day I do go for a walk because I need a recovery day. And everything I do is built around having these outcomes in my mind. How do I sprint across the road? How can I bend down, pick my kid up without doing my back out? How can I make sure I don't collapse, I don't fall over and break a hip? Now, how do I keep these muscles strong? How do I keep my arms strong? How do I put myself in a position that when I go on a holiday, if I've got to carry my bags because the escalator's not working, I can get up the thing? What do I love to do when I go on holidays? What do I love to do? I love going on holidays. When I go on holidays in Europe, I like to walk around and look at shit. And I'll do that every day, all day, every day. How do I make sure that I can actually get around? And then my hip doesn't start playing up, or a glute doesn't start playing up, or my knee doesn't start, or my ankles. Well, my body's got to be fit for purpose. That's my purpose. So build a strategy around exercise. That's the first thing in the morning. There's a lot of nuances and all this stuff, but I'll just give it to you in plain language. I've got to support that exercise regime. So nutrition. What's your nutrition strategy, Mark? I have a nutrition strategy. I went and consulted a nutritionist. I went and found the guy. Many years ago, I used to be a boxer, and I used to have to drop weight to make the weight division because I'm too short to fight in the weight division I actually am at walking around. So I had to drop down to middleweight. That's 75, middleweight, which is 75 kilos. So, but normally I walk around about 84 kilos. So, it was a lot of weight. So I used to have to consult a dietitian, nutritionist, He's called the Fight Dietitian on Instagram. He's very, very famous, _Fight Dietitian. He's the UFC dietitian. Also a lot of boxers in Australia use him. And he used to work on a program to get you to make weight without being dehydrated, etc., etc. Quite a healthy way. He's a young guy. Anyway, I consulted him, paid him some money, consulted him about what does my diet need to look like I'm not preparing for a fight, but like what does my diet look like in terms of inputs, what goes into my guts, what goes into my system. But I also want to make it, edible. And he built me a whole program. But he said to me, Mark, before you do the program, I need to know what your calorie use is. I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, you've got to go get a DEXA scan. Anyone here done a DEXA? Same lady, you're the same people, but it cost me $110 or something like that. It's a DEXA. You lay on a machine, it takes 5 minutes. It tells you where your fat's distributed, what your muscle to fat ratio is, bone to fat ratio. It tells you quite a lot of stuff. It's nothing. It's no big deal. They give you a really good report. But you then know how much fat you have. And by the way, it tells you where you got your fat, if you've got it in good places or bad places, like around your heart or liver, or if you just got it subcutaneously around your guts or whatever the case may be, in your arms, your ass. But it's good information about yourself. You need to know more information about yourself, a DEXA. And the other thing he told me to get is a metabolic rate test. So what a metabolic rate test tells you is not only, now I know how much fat I got in my body, so that tells me how much fat at any one stage I can lose to get, so if I am dieting as such, trying to get a bit of weight down, I've got to make sure that I keep a certain percentage of fat in my body to remain healthy. You don't want to be some skinny person trying to lose weight or training at a rate that makes you lose weight, and then you can't keep the weight on, and then you get too skinny and you lose weight. Your body starts eating into muscle. That's no good for you either. So scientifically, I go about this sort of stuff. The metabolic rate test tells you how many calories and what type of calories from fat and carbs you burn at rest. It's easy to do. It costs about another $150. You sit down, put a mask on your face, and it measures carbon outputs and applies it to an algorithm and tells you how many calories you burn if you do nothing. You just sit there. In other words, what you burn, thinking, breathing, heart rate, stuff like that. No exercise. Then you can make some assumptions about how hard you train, how many steps you do in a day. You can make some assumptions about how many calories you expend in a day. Mathematically. It's not difficult. It's mathematically easy to do. Then you can say, well, okay, how many calories am I consuming? You don't want to consume much more. You don't want to consume much less. Then you can build a diet off the back of that. Instead of going, I'm going to go and buy one of these OptiSlims. You don't even know what you're doing. There's no mathematics associated with any of this stuff. Zero. And all you people, intelligent people, build a strategy. Just like you would for your business. Build a proper bloody strategy for your nutrition, because your nutrition has to support your exercise. Don't go into one of these exercise regimes without a proper nutrition regime. One supports the other. Then finally is your sleep strategy. Now, sleep strategy is critical because that's your recovery period. And you recover from lots of things during your sleep and in different parts of your sleep. So you have to actually have a strategy about this. And a good example of this is when you get your REM sleep and your deep sleep. Now, some people like to put wearables on. And I know lots of people wear the Whoop and they wear the Oura Ring. They're all great. As far as I'm concerned, they're fantastic. I don't like them because I just don't like wearing shit when I go to bed. But I've tried all of them. And they're valuable. But I generally speaking know whether I've had a good sleep or not. I can tell how I feel in the morning, whether I feel refreshed, etc. I generally know. But sleep strategy is more than that. It's about what time do you leave work, regimental-wise? What time do you eat your dinner? Because you need 3 hours after dinner to digest your food before you go to bed. What is my program about these, your smart devices? When do I get off those and stop getting the blue light effect into my eyes so I can get into a proper sleep stage and process? What time do I go to bed? How many hours do I need sleep? So, what's the general conventional view on that? It's 7 hours, preferably 8, but definitely 7. There's 7 hours of a proper style of sleep, like deep sleep and REM sleep, etc. What time do I need to get up to do my exercise? Because do I need exercise before work or after work? I like to exercise before work. I don't like exercising after work. So if I'm going to exercise before work, and I'm assuming I'll start work at 8, I have to get up, I have to get my exercise done before 7, which means I've got to get to the gym before 6, which means I've got to get up at 4:30. If I want to have 7 hours sleep, I've got to go to bed at 9:30. It's pretty simple. If I'm going to go to bed at 9:30, I've got to eat my dinner by 6:30, which means if I've got to eat my dinner by 6:30, work it out. It's mathematical. But that's what a proper strategy is. Now, these are things that will help you with your health span. Lifespan's different. Lifespan depends on health technology. And we don't influence that, but we can access that. Today, maybe in 10 years' time, there will be cures for skin cancer and every other cancer. And there'll probably be, and then maybe in 15 years' time, there'll be cures for all the brain diseases. Up until that point, you need to have access to those people who can help you cure those things or deal with those things if you get symptoms of them, and or give you baselines. So recently, I flew to the US. I was over there for the rugby league, went over there to watch the Roosters kick Brisbane's ass, and watch one of our guys get suspended for 8 weeks. And I went to this. My partner, she's a brain scientist, helps. She's a doctor of epilepsy and brain disorders. And I actually met her when my mother had motor neuron disease, and she was working there at the Brain and Mind Centre at Sydney University and the Royal Prince Alfred. And she was able to book me into this place called Prenuvo, Prenuvo, and it cost $2,000 to get in, $2,500 actually, to get into this place. She was able to get me in. It's like a massive waiting list. We do not have these machines here in Australia. They're an MRI machine, but a special type of MRI machine. We sit in there for an hour and a half. You don't sit there laying there for an hour and a half. It's a bit freaky, but you're in there for an hour and a half, and they scan every part of your body looking for any masses anywhere in your body, and then they give you a full report, and they tell you about the things that are minor, medium, high risk, and then you bring that home to Australia, in my case, and you go to your, whoever you talk to. In my case, I go straight to the experts, the specialists, and I say, I got this report, here's the scans, this is what they said about my liver. And then they are saying, well, we need to do this test and this test, or don't worry, whatever they say. But it's important for us to build markers in our life. Just like I just said to you about the 4 markers that the RBA looks at, we need to have markers about our life too. What do we see is going to happen in the future? It could be, hopefully it's not going to tell you something about right now. But this all folds into something really important. Fortunately, I can do these things. 1, I'm thinking about it, and hopefully you'll be thinking about it after today. 1, I think about it. 2, I plan for it. 3, I actually read about this stuff and I get into the weeds on it myself. I actually get into the weeds. And I love it. I actually love reading about the science of these things because I'm learning, and learning is one of the great takes risk away for dementia because you're keeping your brain active. And I figure if I'm going to be active and keep my brain active in some things, I'm going to choose some things that are beneficial to me. Therefore, I'm trying to build an efficiency. So I'm happy to learn about science. But my access to people is only because I got money. And I use my money to build networks. But the bottom line is, you've got to stay wealthy. Because the only people who are going to live longer and better, unfortunately, are the people who've got money. So wealth groups and or seminars and or meetings, for me, are as much about building money for the right purpose, not the purpose of building assets so you can leave more to your kids, and or, you can have a choice of where you eat your dinner or what car you drive. They're okay. But wealth really should be with another purpose. It shouldn't be a purpose in itself. That's my point. Building wealth is for another higher purpose. It's for yourself, for a better life, a longer life, better to your kids. What I mean by that is, hopefully you're not demented and the kids have to look after you, or they don't see you going through a dreadful cancer process at 70 or 80. At least they can say, like I said about my father recently, well, he was 90 and he had a good life. I mean, that sounds really silly, but that's what you want your kids to say. You don't want your kids to say, oh my God, I'm so traumatised by mum or dad, something bad's they've just died young. That is quite traumatic. And if anything we can do in life to our kids, apart from what we might leave them in terms of assets, we don't want to leave them with a trauma. We don't want to leave them with a fear. We want to make sure that we equip them with strategies. You know what? Mum and Dad did this, and they were building baselines and markers, and they were onto it all the time. I might start doing, I'm the kid talking, I might start doing that. And we want this to be generational, just like your wealth ability, you want that to be generational. Well, you want this strategic process to be generational for your kids as well, about how you can eliminate execution risk for wealth by looking after yourself. Thanks very much.
Well, there were some interesting insights from Mark Bouris. Now, if you enjoyed that, but you're not a subscriber or a follower of this show, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it as your favourite podcast app, why don't you stop for a sec, subscribe to this, so twice a week you're going to get the information my regular guests and I bring you about property, the economy and wealth. So there were some great insights there about how the RBA should be thinking. The discussion about health came out of the blue. That was not what anyone was expecting Mark Bouris to talk about, but clearly health is wealth and you need money to have good health, is Mark Bouris's thoughts. And I really did like his thoughts about the real reason you should get wealthy. Now, if you want to get wealthy also, the majority of Australians, if you just saw the most recent Australian Financial Review Rich 200 list, the vast majority of Australians' wealth comes from property. And even the billionaires, while they make money in other areas in business, they invested in property. So have you invested in property over the last years? Have you considered investing over the last year or two, and did you take action, or are you still sitting on the fence? Let me ask you, how would you feel if you had the opportunity to safely buy a property that increased in value by over $100,000 over the last 12 months? How would you feel if you'd had that opportunity but didn't take it? Now, I'm not, you know me, I'm not a get-rich-quick person. I don't make rash or false promises, but I know others will tell you, you can buy property with no money down or bypass the banks or flip properties or make hundreds of thousands of dollars before Christmas. That's not me. However, if you bought a well-located medium-priced property in a number of capital cities last year, your property would have increased in value by at least $100,000. And if you think about it, you could have gone away on holidays, come back, and your rental income of your property would have probably earned more, that plus the capital growth, more than you would have in your job. Well, the property market is moving on, not as fast as it was before, but I still see a current window of opportunity for smart investors as we move through a slower phase of property cycle. But be careful. Not all properties are investment grade. So even before you start looking at locations or properties, you've got to start with a strategic plan. So why not have a chat with my team at Metropole, an obligation-free chat with one of our wealth strategists to discuss your options. You know by now we're much more than just another buyer's agents. We help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. And while we're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, we're small enough to care. So back to my original question, how would you feel? What's it costing you not to be in the market? What could it cost you to get the wrong advice? Metropole.com.au. Have an obligation-free chat with one of our wealth strategists. Let us help you plan to become the person you plan to become, and then we'll help you execute that plan.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to talk a bit about stress. Is it good? Is it bad? And how do you manage it? Because, let's be blunt, we all get stressed at times. But what's the purpose of stress? It's actually got a useful function for many people. Imagine you're part of a group of cavemen walking through the tall grass of the savannah on a hunt for your next meal. And suddenly, a member of your group catches a glimpse of a lion out of the corner of their eye. The member motions to the other members of the group. In a split second, everyone in the group's on high alert, intensely focused on the movement of the lion. As if the entire group were one person, you're all cautiously moving away from the direction of the lion, never taking your eye off the lion until everyone's out of harm's way. You see, stress is an evolutionary radar system whose purpose is to enable humans to intensely focus on a single threat until the threat no longer poses any danger. It gives us laser-like focus for a short period of time. Everything in our environment other than the threat becomes background noise and becomes ignored. Of course, in the modern world, stress makes it possible for us to study for final exams, to send a man to the moon, to fight off a mugger, even to win a war. Good stress allows us to solve pressing problems, but stress comes at a cost. Stress causes our focus to become very narrowed. It limits our ability to see anything but the problem. Stress forces us to have tunnel vision. Of course, stress that sticks around too long is called chronic stress. Chronic stress damages our immune system, causes plaque to build up in our arteries. It can lead to high blood pressure, if high blood pressure and other things, and you smoke and you have other issues, could lead to stroke or heart attack. Work-related chronic stress inhibits every stressed-out employee's ability to solve the problems of the company because it prevents these employees from being able to look at the bigger picture. Remember, stress narrows your focus. It causes even more stress in many ways. So to stay healthy and solve problems in the workplace, we need to turn off stress. Problem solving, in particular, requires a relaxed mind. Only in a stress-free state are you able to solve the problems, find solutions to the problems you're going to have in your everyday life. So how do you shut down stress? How do you relax your mind? Well, my good friend Tom Corley and co-author of Rich Habits, Poor Habits recently wrote a blog about it, and he suggested the following ways to turn off the stress in your life and to relax your mind. Number one, Tom suggested you laugh more. Find something to laugh about. When you're under stress, find something funny to distract you. Humour shuts down stress and helps reset you so you return to a more emotional, balanced baseline. Tom also suggested people who are chronically stressed consider meditation. Just go into another room, go to the bathroom, devote a couple of minutes just to turn off your mind to meditate. Meditation calms down your mind, shuts down stress, and helps you return to your emotional baseline. Another way of becoming less stressed, according to Tom, and it's well known, is to exercise. Whether it's just going simply for a walk or doing something more active like a run or lifting weights. Of course, you can do yoga or do other things, but exercise is a great way of decreasing stress. And so is reading. Reading something uplifting, reading something that's going to shift your mind away from the negatives to the positive to shut down stress. So if you're feeling some stress in your life, I hope some of these ideas are useful for you. That's really the purpose of me discussing this with you. First of all, to understand that stress is normal, what it does to you, and how you can control it. Another way Tom suggested you control your stress is to watch an inspiring movie. Watching a movie that excites you, inspires you, makes you laugh, takes you away to another place. That's a good way of turning off your stress. Or listening to relaxing music. I know music calms the savage beast. Music relaxes your mind. It turns your stress down, doesn't it? Another great way, if you get stressed, is to engage in something creative activity. Paint, write, make something. Engage a creative pursuit that takes the stress off you. Now, I know what some people do when they stress, and they have a drink. Now, moderate consumption of alcohol relaxes the mind. So 1 or 2 drinks is really all you need to put stress in its place. But if you overdo it, well, that leads to a whole lot of other problems, doesn't it? And another way of relaxing and getting rid of some of your stresses is to socialise. Hang out with a friend or volunteer at a local charity or go to a party or a gathering. Socialising relaxes the mind and changes your mindset. And the last way Tom Corley suggested you can control stress is to change your environment. Move away, step away from your desk or your cubicle or your work area, or go into an environment that puts you in a good mood. This washes away your stress, well, at least for the moment. So, yes, stress is a normal part of life. It has a useful function. A little bit of stress can go a long way to helping you get rid of your problems, solve problems, do the right things, be more successful. Too much stress, though, is unhealthy, and if you are finding that you're getting stressed, why not look through that list of things, listen again to see what you can do to lower your stress levels. So, as Tom said, laugh or meditate or exercise or read, watch an inspiring movie, listen to relaxing music, do something creative, have a beer, just one. Socialise or change your environment. I hope that gives you some ideas about how you can relieve the stresses in your life. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?